Welcome to the Backyard Professor videos. I have with me tonight a very special guest, Dr. James Tabor, a world-renowned biblical scholar and archaeologist who just recently retired, and he is now busier than he has ever been, and he's been one very busy man. How you doing, Dr. Tabor?
I'm doing good. I am so busy, I tell you. It's fun, though. The difference is, it's like the angel Gabriel appeared to me and said, we had a meeting up in the Heavenly Council, and it was decided that you're going to get 50 hours a week free every week, like a sabbatical or what. And I go, really? Like I can do what I want? Absolutely free. And then I say, well, what are the dates? Like, how long am I off? They said, the rest of your life. And I go, what? That's how I feel. So the difference, I mean, I love teaching. I love my students, my grad students, directing MA theses, honor students and all that. But I mean, I did 43 years. I think I paid my dues at 3 different universities, and including the last one, Charlotte. I was there for 33 years. I was chair and everything. So I've sort of done that. And now like you, I see, I don't know, was it Wesley or somebody said the world is my pulpit? So I would say the world is my classroom now, and I just love it. Like the Mark course. I mean, these people taking the Mark course, I meet with them on Zoom, monthly.
Yeah.
And we have a couple of hundred that sign in, and more than that are taking the course. Some of them can't always make it, but it's like an advanced seminar, because you probably know this from your viewers too. They have spent years searching. They're all searchers, or they wouldn't be doing this. They're searching YouTube. They're reading books. I see behind you your books. This isn't my office. I got a few books here, but got another office with I don't know how many thousands of books. But, I'm just so impressed with the level of just the population. And then when you hear some of the stories, some of them have degrees, some don't. But a lot of times they'll go, oh, I was in this church or this movement or that. And then I began reading this and that. And then they start mentioning names of my colleagues. Like, well, I read all of Bart Ehrman's books, and I read all of Paula Friedrichson's, if they're interested in Christian origins. And I read all of Dale Allison's, and I read all of yours. And I go, wow. My undergrad students, believe me, have not read those books. And I'm not going to run them down, but I mean, they're undergrads, hardly get them to read a single book because, they're college kids. So I love teaching, a broader spectrum of human beings on the planet. And I love the international aspect of it. Getting comments from all over the world.
Yeah, that is spectacular. That's one reason why I love doing YouTube videos, and count me as one of the students who have read you and all your colleagues. And I'll be quite frank. I've been watching. I'm very blessed. I have to travel a lot in my work some days, and on those days I get to turn on your YouTube channel and listen to you. And I personally want to thank you right now publicly for all the incredible content. I love your scholarship is really good, but you're so down to earth, no pun intended, because you're talking about heavenly subjects. I get that.
I have a video. I don't know if it's called "The Bad Idea That Took Over the World." Have you heard that one? So yes. I kind of want to be on earth, and if you want to question that, well, Dr. Tabor, don't you care about the world to come or whatever? I want to just quote the Lord's Prayer. Let your will be done on earth. I'm worried more about this life than any world to come, and I'm sure you're that way too. Let's fix this world. It's a very Hebrew Jewish idea, more Hebraic. Let's fix this world. Let's don't fly away and abandon the mess we've made. Let's clean it up, and that just resonates with a lot of people. It really does.
Well, I'm in touch with David Feidler. He's over there in Europe, and he does some great work on the esoteric subjects. And now he's doing a let's get a new renaissance going, only this time let's do the renaissance on the world not just books. And he's doing some fantastic work too. But so I want to say to my audience just briefly,
Sure, go
I
ahead.
won't go through who you are. Most of my audience will know you, but again, I've mentioned this and I've shown this book several times on other my podcasts. The Paul's Ascent to Paradise is Dr. Tabor's doctoral dissertation, and he put it in book form and kind of brought it up to date and all. It is an astute observation of an interesting New Testament experience the Apostle Paul had that most of us, simply because the scholarship, and I mean both within the church and out of the church. I come from a Mormon background, as you may know, and so I talk to a lot of Mormons, post-Mormons, anti-Mormons. Mormons get mad at me for saying what I say, and post-Mormons get mad at me for what I say sometimes. But this material is really good. And another excellent book that I found in my shelf is The Jesus Dynasty.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Here's
what it looks like. And
oh, yes. Yeah, that's the better cover. I lost the book cover.
It's a beautiful cover. You can get it. I looked today. It was only $15 because I was going to order it for a friend. It's a bit, it's what happens with all of us, I think, that work on Jesus and early Christianity, ancient Judaism. That was my field, is we hit an age where we write the Jesus book. And some people do more than one, but you can think back, like Paula Friedrichsen's got one, and Bart Ehrman has one, and Dale Allison, and so forth. So this is my Jesus book. It's different from others. And as you can tell by the title, I think the key to understanding Jesus is James, his brother. And that is, if you want to follow Jesus, go to James the Just. It's actually a quote from the Gospel of Thomas, as you know.
It is.
And I really think that's a key, because what's happened with all of the theology of the Gospels, and we're going to talk about Mark as well, is they have begun to reflect developments that came in 20, 30, 40, 50, and even more years after Jesus. And yet what we can recover of James, and to some degree Jesus as well, it just meshes. And I show that in this book, that there's a set of values and ways of looking at the world and ethics and approaches to life that are very unique, very revolutionary, if we would, and they were apocalyptic, we know that, but that doesn't mean that the proposal they had was wrong. It means that, we didn't get something magically popping out of heaven and solving all our problems. But anyway, I just, that's a great book too.
James is important.
I hate to say my book is great, but
in that case, I will happily say
it. Yeah, I wrote it as a page turner too. I did that on purpose, and it does present what I would call as close as I could get to the historical Jesus. But unlike a lot of books that are just textual, it includes a lot of the material evidence, the archaeology. In fact, every single thing that I do in that book, I always ask myself, well, we have the text. Is there anything archaeologically or on the ground? I've made 74 trips to the Holy Land over the years, Jordan, Israel, whatever, and got my hands dirty at a bunch of digs and so forth. So, Now, I wanted to also say that dissertation has been not rewritten, but shaped in a way that I think you would agree, you read it carefully, is pretty accessible. Normally you go, I'm not going to read somebody's dissertation. That's like too, but see, I was in humanities. I wasn't in theology. So I had to write good English, clear English. I didn't have any jargon. I don't have to give lip service to every scholar that ever said anything about anything. And the notes are there if you want to dig further. But it does explore, and I think we're going to do a future program on that.
We will.
Paul's mysticism, and then the other book, Paul and Jesus, you were going to mention, I'm sure, but I've got the cover right here.
I can't find it. It's somewhere around here. But I've been reorganizing my library.
This is the one I did after the Jesus Dynasty, because my editor at Simon & Schuster said, okay, you done Paul, you got to do Jesus. You claim to follow Schweitzer. A lot of people don't know that Albert Schweitzer, he published in English The Quest for the Historical Jesus, 1906.
Yeah, long time
Then he wrote The Mysticism of Paul the Apostle. So I'm trying to be...
Oh, wow.
It is an amazing book. But see, we didn't have the Dead Sea Scrolls when he wrote.
Right.
And so...
that would be a good comparison, contrast.
Yeah. And so now we're in such a better picture to understand many things in Paul. And of course, I bring in Dead Sea Scrolls, both in the Jesus Dynasty and Paul and Jesus.
Sure.
So thank you for mentioning those, and I hope people will read them. And I don't think anyone will have trouble slogging through, so to speak. I try to write my books in a kind of a gripping way where people will not want to put it down, you know. I mean, that's my goal. So,
and you succeeded with me so far.
Good. That's what a lot of people say.
I consider that one of your true strengths, really, because by any standard of scholastics or academics, you are a scholar, and yet your books are so readable. And I think that is one of your strong points. If you get so scholarly that you can't connect with the audience, you know, I love how you say, and you did, that was one thing about the Jesus Dynasty that just kind of took my breath away. I tried to share it with my dad, who was a really staunch Mormon, and he didn't like it at all. Understandably, it's no big deal. Don't take that personally. But
I don't. Some people don't like it. So.
You remind me of William Dever, Bill Dever. Dever? I've heard him.
Bill Dever. Yeah, he's a good friend of mine.
And
we spent time together in Israel and know each other very well.
Yeah, I know you're friends with him. I've read a lot of his books, and so I love your approach on how you do try to. I just thoroughly enjoyed your Gospel of Mark course. However, let's take a quick look at this. I'll show you my version for my audience, and then I'll let you expound on that. And we will do other podcasts on many of your other subjects. I love.
Yeah, so we're going to do Mark, but believe it or not, we're going to bring in Paul, because I'm going to put forth the thesis that Mark is actually a reflection of Paul. So we'll see how that goes. So
that'll be fun.
In other words, when you're reading Mark, you're not reading his letters, but you're reading someone who is very influenced by Paul. And that would not be true of Luke or Acts, which is very surprising. So we'll have to get into that. Because I mean,
yeah. Let me
think that Luke is a big fan of Paul. Well, we'll talk about it. So.
All right. Awesome. I'm looking forward to it. This is Dr. Tabor's course on Mark that he's talking about. Now, I will put a link down below in the description on this that you can order this course. There are videos. You've got like 7 or 8 videos. He has done a wonderful course. You can print this out. This is his outline, his syllabus. Each lecture, what he's talking about a little bit in outline. You can get more on the videos. They are so beautifully done. The maps are just exquisite. Thank you for doing that part in this course. It's really actually important. Jerusalem in the time of Jesus, you can kind of make your way around geographically where Mark and Jesus, where Mark puts Jesus, etc. And then you have this magnificent biography of the magnificent man. That's you. Take it out. And then the thing that's so interesting, Dr. Tabor, about this course that I really, at first I was surprised, and then I heard your explanation in another interview. This is the Gospel of Mark, and you can print this out, you guys, and I would strongly recommend you have to, because there's no other better way to do this. And you can see on mine, I've already scribbled on mine and put notes and asked questions. But the Gospel of Mark, as Dr. Tabor has given us here, is not quite the same as in the New Testament, not because, and I will let you explain it better, but I didn't get the impression it's because you're trying to downgrade Jesus in Mark, or you're trying to make Mark say something that he didn't mean. What my impression is we want, as you say in a lot of your videos, and you'll echo this again tonight, I'm sure. I'm going to say it first, though. We want to study each of the Gospels on their own.
Yes.
Now, when I was doing research on the Gospel of John and his comparison with Dr. Dennis R. MacDonald on the Dionysius ideas in the Gospel of John,
right,
I was surprised to find that John was written not only in a later time, I knew that, but it was where he wrote and where his community was compared to where the community is that the Gospel of Mark is writing to, or Matthew, or Luke. All these four Gospels are not in Jerusalem, and the Jews in Jesus's day and thereafter, even after Paul, did not have all four Gospels. Some of the communities only ever knew about the Gospel of Mark. So I believe your methodology of let's examine Mark without supplementing from the other Gospels, and we'll find the real Mark. I love that approach. I've loved this course. You guys are going to want to get this course.
Well, thanks. I'm glad that you.
Yeah.
A lot of people have.
I would like to see you do more.
A lot of it is, I've got a Bible here, I think somewhere. So, people have a Bible. So here's my RSV it's got the Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, New Testament, Apocrypha. So why not use your Bible? Mark your own Bible.
Sure.
Because I want you to take it out. I want you to hold Mark. It's psychological as much as instructive. There's something about waving it around like you're doing and saying, what does this in my hand say? And you really do need to read Mark as Mark and actually put away, like you say, well, I wonder who Jesus' father was. Mark never mentions Joseph. Okay. So that's significant. Yeah. So let's stay with Mark. Let's see. And it's also respecting the text. A lot of people say, well, you're doing some sort of liberal critical thing. I don't like those labels. I call it careful. My word for liberal is careful. And liberal, or being careful with the text in the sense that I'm going to let the text speak rather than me override the text with my own ideas. And that's what often happens. And you have Matthew and Luke and John, and you have Christmas plays and church sermons and maybe your own faith background. Even if you have a very strong current belief in Jesus and what we'd call pretty evangelical way, that doesn't matter. Why wouldn't you want to read Mark, as Mark? And so it can.
Yeah, he doesn't even have a.
It has nothing to do with what you bring to it. It has to do with what you are going to get from it. You can, lay aside everything and just read it. And I feel it's respecting Mark, as you said, as Dennis has pointed out. These things circulated. And if this was indeed the earliest, which I absolutely am convinced that it was, and many colleagues agree with it, and I can give arguments for it and so forth, but I think it was first, then people didn't have Matthew and Luke and John. Well, what was their experience? It's almost, you remember that old song, Tell Me the Story of Jesus? I don't know if Mormons sang it, but
we do, actually.
Real evangelical, tell me the story of Jesus. So what you're saying to Mark, tell me your story of Jesus, not the story. Tell me your story of Jesus. And I don't know who wrote it. We call it Mark. That's a title that got added later. People began to decide it was written by John Mark, the companion of Paul, and so forth. But, if the author doesn't name himself, and like Paul's letters often, all of them attributed to Paul, he puts his name. But if somebody doesn't claim something, don't claim it for them. You're imposing that. In other words, an author in the ancient world can put their name. If you've ever start reading Josephus, I've got complete works here in the Loeb Classics. If I open up the life of Josephus, he says, hello, I'm Josephus, and I'm, okay, so I'm not imposing anything. But you say, well, mine says at the top the Gospel of Mark. Well,
Mark,
that's an editorial addition that is in the 4th and 5th century manuscripts. But when Mark wrote it, maybe he wanted it to be anonymous. Have you ever thought of that? And people say, well, where did this come from? Just read it. Just read it. This is the story of Jesus of Nazareth and what he's all about. And so, yeah, the course will lead you into that. And I learned my Mark, Carrie, from Norman Perrin, University of Chicago, great New Testament scholar. He was British. He studied with T.W. Manson, and he was a kind of Boltzmannian theologically, but, you know, that's another subject when you get into theology. But he was just phenomenal. I took probably 5 courses from him, and most of them had to do with Mark. We used to call him Mr. Mark because that's about all he taught. But, you know, he has a New Testament introduction that's still out there today that's pretty good. It's out of date, but I still like it a lot. Used to use it in my courses years ago, but I don't use textbooks. For the last 20 years, I haven't used textbooks. I want to use the original source material. So with my students, I did this in my university classes for years. I said, okay, you got a Bible at home. We're going to do Mark. I do a course in Mark. I'm giving you a copy of Mark. It's part of the course. You bring it to class. Mark, based on what we're doing. And put your, like you've done, put your notes, put your underlines, put your questions. And what I do every month now, I can't believe I started this. It's quite a challenge, but we've had, we've had 2 of them. I think we did it in March, April, and we're going to do it on the 28th of May. So if anybody signs up as a result of your program this week, I will get your email address. This is handled by Myth Vision podcast courses, but they will give me the emails and you'll get an invitation to the Zoom meeting. And it's Sunday at noon Eastern on the 28th, this month. And what we're going to do is...
Can I just interject real quick? I've been to one of those. I couldn't get to the second one, but they are phenomenal.
And we record them and upload them, so whether you can make it or not, you can listen. And we go for a couple hours. And what I'm going to do this next Sunday, about a week from now, is I've got this whole list of questions that people who have taken the course have asked. So whether people sign up now and they say, well, I don't have time to do the course yet, it doesn't matter, because you're going to start hearing amazingly good questions. You'll see. So I consider these students now my class. They're my Mark class. They're very expanded from a small class of 20 or 30. Yeah. But it's pretty fabulous. I think we had 220.
We are honored to be your students. This is so much fun for the rest of us. If no one else has ever told you, I'm telling you.
Well, quit praising me, Kerry. You'll just make me become...
It's going to swell your head.
Not really.
Good.
Nah.
You deserve to have a swollen head, however. Not so big you can't go through the doorway, though, Dr. Tabor. No, I again, and also your blog. I wanted to say your blog, jamestabor.com, right?
Yeah, it's easy. If you remember my name, you just add the .com and you got it. It's got 500 posts on it, lots of links. And some of the subjects I cover, the blog would be like in-depth explorations and articles on those subjects. And it's got a good search feature. There's a monthly newsletter that's free. You can sign up for. You can ask for notifications. So the blog is a backup resource. I'm doing a lot on YouTube, as you know. That's James Tabor videos, so that's easy too. In that station, that channel is doing really well. I put up one today.
I just watched it.
I thank the people for this, because I mean, I put it up this morning, maybe 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
And then I didn't even look till a couple hours ago. It had already had 3,000 views, and I'm going, what?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and it's called...
and I love your video. You do several short videos, 10 to 20 minutes, and you have a
Right.
picture or two up there, and you are reading a historical situation, comparing it with how a gospel presents it with Josephus or with
Yeah,
Philo.
people like
I
that
love
because
that.
you can't
Yeah.
always watch a video. Sometimes people like to exercise, they like to walk, they
Yep.
like to jog, they like maybe they're doing something else.
Yeah.
So that way, you know, I most of them are videos like this. Some are
Yes.
slideshows, and then you would need to watch it because I have something up that. But like even what we're doing now, you don't have to look at us to follow what we're saying. You know.
No, yeah, and I've noticed that about a lot of your videos. I do watch the ones with slides as I can in the evenings, and those slides are so excellent. Your Jesus Talpio tomb, uh, wow, that's just so interesting. And the Jesus Pandera, oh my gosh, that is just so interesting. And we will do those later. I don't mean to diverse, but yeah, there's just so many fascinating topics. And this Gospel of Mark, what you've done with this course is you've helped me decide, hey, I need to really get serious about learning the Greek. I also have a BYU New Testament scholar expert, Trevin Hatch, who has been doing videos with me, and he has said he's not doing the traditional uh, Mormon Jesus view. He wants to get to the real Jesus, the Jewish Jesus. And I told him, well, you've got to watch and listen to James Tabor. He says, I already do. And
Okay, good.
is really bringing out some excellent information. So this is a beautiful dovetail, but your approach to Mark is really nice. So we are going to sit at your knees and learn from you tonight. So what have you got, Dr. Tabor?
Well, I wanted to start with just you'll get this from the course, but kind of set it up a little
Sure.
bit for you. What I say in the course is that line 1 of Mark 1:1, and I've got it right here, the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Now, the phrase Son of God may not be in there in the original because Bruce Metzger, you know, he's the text critic that Bart Ehrman worked with at Princeton, and he rates these variants A, B, C, D, and I don't know if he does F or not, but an A would be it's probably a really solid reading, the very best manuscripts comparing them. So he gives this a C. I don't mind it being in there because what I'm arguing in the very beginning of the course is that this is presented like a drama or a play. I don't mean it isn't true. It's nothing to do with that kind of thing. That's up to people to decide how they take it.
Right.
But it's a drama. And so this would be the curtain goes up and it's going to open with the scene of John the Baptist. But before it goes up, someone comes on the side of the stage, just using that analogy, and says this: the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Like that. Or they might even add, they don't know. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So then it's the secret. Mark has got this secret. So early on in chapter 4, he talks about the secret of the kingdom. So even in the first lesson, I tell the students, okay, I'm not going to tell you what the secret of the kingdom is. And it's not like I know it and nobody else does. I think we can figure it out, but I don't want to give you that answer. And then as you go through, I think I quoted badly or maybe accurately Churchill about a mystery wrapped in an enigma or something like that. You know, he's talking about the Soviet Union, actually. It's quoted a lot in the news and so forth. In fact, I heard it quoted this morning on one of the news shows. So that's how Mark is. It's a mystery, a puzzle, an enigma.
Yeah.
And what it does, it's a test for the reader. Like I've just told you, if you're reading the first line, who Jesus is. He's the Messiah, the Christ, the Son of God. And you say, oh, well, Good. I'm ready to hear. I know that. No, that's just the opening line. Now, as the story starts with John the Baptist preaching in the desert, repentance and baptism for the remission of sins, now you're getting the story starting. So you follow that. And then you have Jesus come, I think it's in verse 9. Listen to this. In those days, Jesus came from Nazareth of Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. But forget line 1. Remember, that's the secret. Doesn't mean you understand it, but you've got the words. Jesus Christ, Son of God. So you don't, if you're just reading from verse 2 on, you don't know who that is in verse 9, right? Because that was introduced by the beginning of the play, so to speak. And
Right.
now, so you go, in those days, Jesus came, you go, who's Jesus? Well, he's from Nazareth and he's from the Galilee. Okay, so then you need to kind of dissolve from your mind everything you know, if you can. Don't make any suppositions. And now we have two characters. John the Dipper, really is what it means, the baptizer. He dips people in the Jordan River. And now Jesus from Nazareth comes to get baptized and so forth. So then the next dramatic moment, and I'm not going to do the whole course, obviously, I'm just going to illustrate this, is Jesus is baptized and a voice speaks. But here's where it becomes so important not to have other things in your head. The voice is not a loudspeaker announcement. This is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased. Not in Mark. In Mark, it's you are my beloved Son.
Oh,
so
it
if you
is.
just read Mark, you wouldn't know that this is. But see, whatever movie has not put the this is, because it's so dramatic. Matthew's the this is guy. Luke follows Mark. Luke is much more, I don't want to say respectful, but he allows the Mark source to come through more without so many changes. Matthew changes a lot of things in Mark because he basically is worried about them. Like later on, Jesus tells a man who calls him good master, good rabbi, what do I do to inherit eternal life? He goes, why are you calling me good? There's none good but God. It's like, what? Now, Matthew says, we don't want to do Matthew tonight, but Matthew's saying something like, whoa, people are going to think Jesus isn't divine. So he changes it to, why do you ask me about the good? Now I didn't write that. You put them side by side. This is a good book to have. And
interesting, subtle change. Yeah.
This is Throckmorton's Gospel Parallels.
Yeah, I've got that one too somewhere in my life.
This one is more readily available, I think, because it's American Bible Society. You can get all 4 Gospels, John as well. And of course, John doesn't parallel the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, so thoroughly, but all of John is in there, and sometimes he does parallel. But anyway, you've got to put that out of your head. And that way you actually are told what the voice says to Jesus. But now Jesus is getting the identification. You are my
it does say, thou art my beloved Son, with thee I am well pleased. That's a direct
right. So it is a disclosure to Jesus, a moment that he had. So we're not talking about, did the voice say it? Did he hear it? Did this happen? Did that happen? What happens when you conflate the Gospels? Let's say this is a perfect example. They say, well, Matthew says the voice said this is. It's so easy to harmonize. So easy. I don't care. Even why do you ask me about the good master? Just put them both together. The voice said this is, and then he goes to Jesus. You are. But now you've lost Mark. You've now lost Mark. Keep Mark as Mark. I think it's just so important because Mark is trying to do something with you as the reader. And he even addresses the reader in chapter 13. Interesting. I don't know. None of the other Gospels do this. Chapter 13, he says, let the reader understand. So he expects you, the reader, and he's kind of worried that you won't get this. And
You're,
it's about
you're
the
separate
sign
from it. Interesting.
of the second coming of the parousia. It's a sign. And he goes, and he doesn't even tell you where the sign is. He talks about a desolating sacrilege and so forth, and we could get to that. But anyway, he goes, let the reader understand. Whereas Matthew goes, it's Daniel. You need a clue. It's Daniel. Where you at least know what book to look in. So Mark doesn't do that. And in that sense, Mark is a little harder. He doesn't make it easy on you to figure it out. So as you go through the story, you begin to find out that the teachings are riddles, and they're to purposely keep people from understanding, which is just very shocking. Very clearly stated by Jesus to the crowds. Mm-hmm. And the disciples get the inside teaching. So you get to be one of the disciples in Mark and listen to him tell them private things. So several times it'll say, and he took Peter, James, and John aside, or he took the 12 aside and told them this. Well, you get to hear that. See? But then when he goes back out, you're back with the crowds. So you're literally up here getting to watch it all, hear it all. What a privileged thing then to follow Mark, because you get to see it all. And there's no other book in the New Testament that works like this. Matthew uses Mark as a source. Luke uses it, but it doesn't stay Mark, because he's mining it for material. See the difference? Like if I have a source, I'm writing a book and I've got a source, and I use that source heavily, but the source is another thing. I'm now making use of it. This is what people don't understand. So you need to read the source first.
Yeah, and the other thing I might point out,
everything.
Yeah, the other thing I might point out too is, wasn't Mark being the first gospel, but wasn't Mark basically the only gospel for over a decade?
Yeah, the dating's hard. I mean, typically you're going to see, you put on the board in a class, Mark around 70, Matthew around 80, Luke around 90, and then you realize, what are you, just arbitrarily jumping decades? Yeah, that is what we're doing. Don't worry about the date.
Okay.
It's probably very tied to the 70 CE destruction of the Jerusalem by the Romans. It could be slightly before, slightly after. I don't think it's decades and decades after. I know some try to put it way late into the 2nd century. I don't think that works, because the issue of the temple is still vital to the readers.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of just gives you a little bit about the course. I'm not going to try to cover it, because you can take the course if you want to hear more. Yeah. But what I did want to cover, Kerry, is, I guess you could call it the theology of Mark. I'm not big on the word theology, but what are the big ideas of Mark? And time again, he is reflecting Paul and the theology of Paul, particularly what we see in Paul's early authentic letters. And this should be particularly 1st and 2nd Corinthians, like the divorce decree that's quoted in Mark. I think it's chapter 10. Paul quotes it verbatim. Whoever puts away his wife and marries another commits adultery, and the wife puts away her husband, commits adultery. Paul knows this. Now, Mark is written later, so even on something as simple as that, just taking a topic, the big one would be the Last Supper. The Last Supper in Mark 14, taking bread, taking wine, this is my body, this is my blood. Go to 1 Corinthians 11, it's almost just directly lifted from that. And what is really amazing, and you know this from my Paul work, is Paul says, I received this from the Lord, and I'm delivering it now to you, that on the night he was betrayed, he took bread and so forth. So how did Mark have this idea of what Jesus said on the at the Last Supper? That's a private meeting of Jesus and the 12. So how does he get this? You say, well, there's probably a tradition going around of what Jesus said. Not according to Paul. He said, I got it from the Lord, from Jesus.
Yeah.
Now, this goes into this Paul's ascent to paradise. Paul claims to have conversational revelations from Jesus of Nazareth. Whether he did, whether he didn't, whether they're illusions or true revelation, people have to work that out themselves. But he does make that claim. And then once Matthew and Luke follow that, which they definitely do, John doesn't, but they do. He doesn't even have he does have a Last Supper, but he doesn't mention any ritual of body and blood. He takes it more metaphorically earlier in chapter 6, kind of, I'm the bread of life. If you eat the bread, and so forth. But he does say, eat my body, drink my blood. So John is influenced by Paul too. Everybody's influenced by Paul, let me tell you. And so that would be a big example. Also, Mark's Christology, his view of Jesus of Nazareth, why do you call me good? There's none good but God. People would think, and lots of people think this, I kind of changed my mind over the years. Well, Paul would be very, very high on Christology because they always go to Philippians 2. Though he's in the form of God, he didn't count equality God a thing to be grasped. Well, you know from reading my book, I argue that is not about Jesus in heaven.
Right.
And many scholars have said this. I didn't originate this. I learned it from Charles Tabor, a great biblical scholar. And he argues that it's an Adam Christology. And what does that mean? God creates the clay dust Adam, Genesis 1. Now he sent a form of that Adam, though he's in the form of God. Remember, Adam's made in the form of God.
Yeah.
But he grasped equality. What does the serpent say to Eve? If you'll eat this fruit, you'll be equal to God. So it's actually not about he's in heaven, he comes down to earth, then he goes back to heaven. Paul's Christology has to apply to you because you're not in heaven. You're not some churches might say this, you're a pre-existent divine being, and some people believe in incarnation and all that. No, Paul has an Adam Christology. He believes that flesh and blood Adam beings, human beings, have the potential to become divine. Not just Jesus, but he's the firstborn of many brothers.
Any brother.
I would add sisters, except it's not really genderfied. It has nothing to do with male or female.
Yeah, we're not going gender here.
There's no male or female.
You are included.
But the idea is, we go to Mark, and what does he say when someone says, what is the great commandment of the Torah? Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. What does Paul say in 1 Corinthians 8? For us there is one God, the Father, from whom are all things, and so forth. And one Jesus, the Lord.
Lord Jesus,
through whom are all things, meaning the new creation through him. He's not saying Jesus created the world. Now, later Paul, there's early Paul, later Paul, and then really later Paul, if you go all the way. But Colossians and Ephesians developed that. So the same thing happens with Paul that happens with Mark. Instead of just reading what Paul says when they're reading Corinthians, people go, yeah, but in Ephesians and Ephesians and Colossians, he says he existed before the creation and he's the...
Interesting.
They just read it that way. Well, wait a minute. Is that really what he means? And I think Mark is reflecting the same Christology as Paul. Now, this is a view I've held now for about 5 years. I did not hold it when I wrote my dissertation. to this extent. I don't think Paul thought Jesus was a pre-existent divine being. I think he thought he was a Adam who did not grasp for equality, and then God poured out his Spirit on him, and he became a servant. What does Mark emphasize throughout? Every time Jesus talks to disciples, be a servant, be least. You got to suffer. Don't tell me about the glory and the power.
Take up my cross and
can I be in the kingdom? Can I be at the right and left hand? Can I be the first? It's wonderful ethics from Paul. Become like a child. So you start reading Mark and you realize the message is actually, there is glory. There's no question there's glory in Mark. Jesus is going to be glorified. He's going to be raised from the dead in Mark. And he says that. But when they want to dwell on that power of, like the transfiguration, Mark 9:1, some of you will not taste of death till you've seen the kingdom come with power. Okay, and then they have a vision, and Jesus is shining and glorious, and Moses and Elijah. It's like we're in the resurrection. We're in the kingdom. We're up on a mountain, high mountain, it says. Okay, that Mark believes that will be later, but it's not then. And then they wake up and they go, oh, wow, so we're here, ready. Let's go to Jerusalem. And he goes, wait. You want to go to Jerusalem? Are you sure? Because I'm going to be killed, spit upon, rejected. And yes, on the third day, God will raise me and glorify me. But if you want to follow me, you too, as you said, have to take up a cross. Now, people today just read that like, almost like, oh, yeah, we really need to sacrifice. I mean, come on. Take up a cross is not a metaphor. He's saying we are going to Jerusalem, and you guys will be nailed up. And I'm going to be nailed up, and you're going to be naked and just
I don't know if I could have done it.
I mean, so do you want to follow? And each time he says that, they don't listen, and Mark juxtaposes their misunderstanding. And I can say this, I think, without fear of refutation or contradiction. The disciples in Mark never get it, ever in Mark. And they run away at the cross, and you never see them again. Yeah. They all forsook him and fled. Yeah. And of course, Peter is at the trial and sort of lurks around. But I'm talking about they never appear. Like in Matthew, we're all on a mountain and it's all glorified now. No, never. And that's why people go, well, is the ending right? I mean, why is that ending gone? Well, again, it reflects Paul. The glory's coming, but don't be talking about the glory. The glory is not the motivation. The motivation is become a suffering servant. Yeah. Mark is suffering servant. Paul is suffering servant. I even think, as you know from my Paul's Ascent to Paradise, I think Paul found himself in Isaiah 49.
Yeah, I thought that was
before I was when I was in my mother's womb, he called me and appointed me as a messenger to the nations, to bring light to the nations. What does Paul say? I was called in my mother's womb to go to the nations. So he thinks Jesus is the Isaiah 53 character,
and he's
wounded for our transgressions, the people of Israel particularly, and he believes that he is filling up what is lacking in the sufferings of Christ. I know this is all new to people. It's not standard Christianity. But if you'll take it bit by bit, read Paul as Paul, read Mark as Mark, and read early Paul, authentic Paul, the first.
So which ones would you say are early Paul then?
Well, you could start with Romans. Just take the order. Start with Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians.
Okay.
Then you want to do 1 Thessalonians, Galatians, and Philemon, and Philippians. Those are the 7. That's the early Paul.
Galatians and Ephesians are kind of disputed.
No, Galatians is okay. Totally okay.
But Ephesians is the disputed one.
Ephesians and Colossians.
Colossians
are secondary Paul.
Right.
They still have a lot of Paul, but this other Christology's been overwritten. And then you get Timothy, Titus, and so forth, those three. That's pretty well Pauline school. We call them the pastorals. And then you get Luke, Acts, and Acts has Paul, but I call that legendary Paul. That's not straight Paul. So, but back to Mark. So Mark is actually reflecting the Pauline theology, which is really not that complicated. Do you remember Dietrich Bonhoeffer, hearing about him in World War II? He was a Lutheran pastor. Hitler gave the order that all Lutheran pastors must put a copy of Mein Kampf on the pulpit next to the Bible. That's, for people who are too young to know, that's Hitler's autobiography. So you got to have the Bible up on the pulpit, every Lutheran church in the world, and then you got to have Mein Kampf. And so Dietrich Bonhoeffer is a pastor of a Lutheran church. He's a minister. He goes in and he takes the copy of Mein Kampf and throws it on the floor and steps on it. And he says, "This will never be on the pulpit. Let's hear the word of God." He's arrested very quickly after that, thrown into prison. And he writes this book called Letters and Papers from Prison. And then he writes his masterpiece. It's called The Cost of Discipleship. It's pure Mark. And what he says is, first line, when Christ calls a man, he calls him to die. Period.
Whoa.
Just like a crescendo.
That's heavy, isn't it?
That is heavy.
That's
now,
heavy.
I'm not a preacher. I'm not telling people, well, you better follow Christ and you're going to have to give up everything. But I'm going to tell you what Mark says. I'm going to tell you what Mark's Jesus said. And, you know, Bob Dylan has a song where he says, "You're not him," talking about Jesus. You know, forgot which song, but he's talking about Jesus. And he goes, "But you're not him." So, you know, I'm not him. Nietzsche also said there was only one Christian. This is Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche. There was only one Christian. He died on a cross. And what he was reflecting wasn't like you couldn't be a follower, but he's looking around. He goes, I don't see anybody doing that. You know, I mean, churches are prosperous and
still don't.
You join churches to get business contacts. Let's say you're an insurance salesman. I'm not saying you don't have any faith, but it's a good social thing to do in our culture. I'd say you're better off joining a church. Your kids are going to be better off. They're going to make friends. You know, they're going to be taught these basic things. But what if people came in with handcuffs and, you know, guns and we're going to lock you up and kill you? I think the churches would be pretty empty. So I'm not claiming any kind of moral superiority. I mean, I'm not planning on selling my house or leaving my family behind, but Mark says to do that. So Mark is tough. Mark and Q, you know, Q are the same.
That's the real gospel.
Those are so tough.
Yeah.
There's a man years ago, it was in the 20s, I think, Bruce Barton. You might be old enough to know this. The man nobody knows. He was a businessman, a salesman. He started reading the New Testament, and he goes, this isn't what they're saying in church. So he wrote a book called The Man Nobody Knows. Basically just good Sermon on the Mount stuff. And he said, you know, it's like a fictionalized kind of thing about a man who says, I'm going to start doing what Jesus said to do. And all of a sudden, basically the society collapses, because if you started doing what Jesus said to do, like nothing will work the way it works. You know, if you have two coats, give to him who has none. Things like that. Yeah. Bless those who curse you. You ever take somebody's parking place by mistake? Is that what you got? Did they get out and say, look, that was my place, but don't worry. You know, you didn't see me. You might need it more than I know. This isn't how people behave. Some people do. Some people are trying to follow Jesus. Sure. But anyway, Mark is, I don't want to get into my preacher mode here, because I have a kind of professorial preacher style, but it has to do with don't misread this text and don't domesticate it. Don't make it into some kind of easy thing. See?
Believe in Jesus and you've got it made. That's not.
Yeah, and even then, just, basically live your life. Everybody wants to have a good life and comfort and savings, and it's wonderful. I like that too.
Take no thought for the morrow, Jesus said.
Oh boy, yeah. Sell what you have. That's Mark.
Sell what you
Sell
have.
what you have and give to the poor.
Boy.
That's what one guy asked. I'd like to follow
He
you.
did.
Go sell everything.
Yeah, and
goes,
he was doing everything up to that point.
Yeah, all the commandments. Yeah.
He was, hey, I got 9 out of 10, but why did you give me that 10th one?
So I think Mark is preserving something, and I think the reason he's writing what he writes is he's concerned that the followers of Jesus are drifting into this sort of glory hallelujah mode. Hook your star to Jesus and you'll be glorified whenever you die, or if Christ comes again. And sort of like, what am I going to get if I do this? And what Mark is saying, what are you going to get? Why don't you talk about what you're going to lose? Because the answer is everything.
Everything.
In Mark, Peter says, Lord, we've left all and followed you.
Yeah.
Now, he does say in Mark, no one who does that will be without father, mother, brothers, sisters, lands, and so forth in this world and in the world to come, eternal life. Because Mark believed, and it didn't happen, but he did believe that the kingdom of God was very near, at hand, literally, like your hand. You can touch it. This book is at hand. It's at my hand. I don't have to go across the room or downstairs to get it. Kingdom of God is at hand. And it's near, even at the doors and so forth. You get Mark 13, very, very apocalyptic. Mm-hmm. This generation will not pass. Some of you who will standing here will not taste of death, and so forth. So Mark is very apocalyptic. The other thing he does that Paul hints at but doesn't fully get into is that the form of the current dispensation of Judaism is passing away. And Paul gets into it a little bit. Like he says, what's already here is ready to pass away. It's already not yet. Right. But in Mark, it's real clear that I sometimes have said, and I've never heard anybody say this actually, but I'm sure somebody has, that Mark is the first Jewish document. I'm going to call it Jewish for a minute, so don't jump out of your seat, those that are listening. The first Jewish document from the post-temple period. And it is proposing a new way to follow the God of Israel without the temple. All right. You never hear that. And what do I mean? Well, after the temple's gone, there's no sacrifices. There's no going up to the temple. And how does Mark end in chapter 12? There's a person in chapter 12 who's told you're not far from the kingdom.
That's right.
And that's a key to the whole book, because we're trying to figure out the secret of the kingdom. And he tells the guy, you're getting close. And it's an idea that he's beginning to get, that if you love God and love your fellow human being as yourself, this is more than all of this. And they're in the temple, and I picture him, he mentions burnt offerings, sacrifices, and then he tells a story about a widow with 2 copper coins called a lepton. It'd be smaller than even a penny. I've got actual leptons downstairs in my collection. They're very small, about a quarter of the size of an American copper penny. And this woman gives 2 of those coins. The disciples are all talking about the buildings, and isn't this amazing? Again, we're going to take this over pretty soon. Wow, we're going to sit on thrones and judge the 12 tribes of Israel and all that stuff. And then he goes, did you guys see that woman? And they go, what happened? He said, she put in 2 copper coins, and she's a widow and she's poor. So I tell my students, she's got 3 strikes against her. She's missing the 3 M's: male, who protects the woman, right? Money, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And what else?
No,
She's a widow, so she doesn't have a male. She's a woman, so no male. And essentially, she has this faith that he says she gave more than all the rest.
Oh, she has more than all the. Yeah, she gave her all.
She gave her all. Yeah. So the thing is,
that really inverts all of our values today, doesn't
and
it?
right after that, you know what the disciples say as they're walking out of the temple? They look back from the Mount of Olives. You can look in the map in the course, and they go, "Look, Master, these beautiful buildings that Herod built." Well, Herod's a horrible person.
Yeah.
Jesus is just like, he's got to be like, ugh.
That's the famous meme, the face palm Jesus.
I just told you what true religion is. A person sacrificing all they have. And you are still talking about the buildings. So let me tell you about the buildings. A day is coming very soon, this generation, and not one stone will be left on another of that temple. Won't even be there. And it's not. It's not.
Yeah, and those were, some of those stones were like 10, 20-ton stones. That was not a small tent that Herod.
Right. Now, there are foundation stones for the temple complex, but that's saying no stone on another. That's like, you know, people get it so literal, and they go to Jerusalem and go, Dr. Tabor, what am I going to do? I see Herodian stones one on another. And Jesus said there wouldn't be. It's like, you know, you say, unfortunately, right outside my window here, our neighbor's house burned down last summer. It was just horrible. And you say, it's burned to the ground. There's nothing left. And somebody says, wait, I see a concrete porch. Why are you saying there's nothing left? There's a porch left. This is ridiculous. What he's saying is it's going to be totally gone. Okay. You don't have to get down to, it's a saying, you know, that's going to come down brick by brick. There'll be nothing left, you know, that kind of thing.
I think perhaps Mark is trying to give in Jesus's words the idea that this world is passing away and you're still focusing on that.
That's right. That's
the
right.
widow had part of the world, so to speak, 2 little coins, and she left it.
She left it.
And it's her act that means more than all these buildings. That reminds me, do you think, does Jesus come across in your understanding, does Jesus come across as being anti-temple establishment? Is he against the temple, or is he against those who are running it?
I think he thinks it's coming down, and you know, God, there are 2 things God never wanted in the Hebrew Bible people forget: a temple and an earthly king, right? So that's in the book of Samuel, that God says, I never asked for a temple. I've been living in a tent. I'm just fine, you know, and an earthly king. And that woman, I think I was trying to make the point about the 3 M's, and now I think I slipped up. And what I wanted to say is no man, first of all, she's a woman, not a male, because if you're a male, you have power. She has no husband, so she's not a male. M number 1. She doesn't have a husband, you know.
So no marriage
and no money. So those are she's a picture in that culture of no power. No power. If you don't have money, you're not a male. You don't have to be married, but if you're a male, you can still have power. But if you're a woman, questionable in that culture. So he's but what he's really, he's also against the traditions of men. That's a big thing in Mark.
It is.
Mark has seen how the Pharisees have begun to develop different kinds of traditions, picking grain on the Sabbath, chapter 2, chapter 7, washing hands before you eat, ritual purity, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Mark is saying, look, remember, ritual purity has to do with the temple. I know people follow it today, but what people forget, all of the rites of cleansing, the mikvah, going to the pool and washing, that was so that you could go up to the temple. Many religions have this. It's not just the Jewish faith in the time of Jesus. There are many Greek texts that talk. If you go to my blog, jamestabor.com, I have some of these texts under. There's a heading called the Jewish Roman World of Jesus, and there's a pop-down menu. You can read some of these texts where it's talking about Athena, and it says, no one can come to the temple of Athena if they have done this or that, and it's some of the same kind of ritual defilements, including, usually it's sex, blood, and death, right? Menstruation, sex, having sexual intercourse. People think, oh, a woman has her period, she's unclean. Well, if a man has a seminal emission, he's also unclean. And unclean is not a good translation because we think of dirt. It's nothing to do with, it means you're disqualified from going up into the holy. There's the holy and the profane, the normal, the everyday. And if you're going to enter the holy, you have to leave behind the signs of mortality, sex, blood, and death. So let's say you've gone to a funeral and you've been around the tombstones and maybe even touched a dead body. You have to go to the mikveh before you can go then up to the temple. It's ritual purity. It's nothing to do with. So Mark says, he says basically that's over. That's over. That's why I tend to think he's written slightly after 70 AD. He's, having Jesus look forward to it. But I think he's right, because otherwise it would be irrelevant to say, look, here's what defiles. You guys were worried about washing your hands or this or that. There, even Mark 7 says about dipping your dishes before, making sure they're kosher, and you touch not, taste not, handle not, all of these rules of religion. And he says, well, I'll tell you what defiles is what comes out of the heart. And then he names 13 things that defile a person. So those are the defilements of Mark. And he would absolutely agree with Paul again. What does Paul say? When he talks about clean, unclean, going to a temple, eating this, eating that, that's not what it really is. It is, the kingdom of God is not food and drink. It's not touch not, taste not, handle that, not. He's reflecting already what Paul anticipates while the temple's still standing. But Mark now is saying, that's Jesus said that was over. And by the way, I don't want to give away too much of the course, but one thing I'll mention, since I mentioned Mark 7, maybe whet people's appetite a little bit. Thus he declared all foods clean in Mark 7. It's not in the Greek. The Greek does not say that. Everybody quotes that. And even though the translation's put in parentheses, people go, oh, don't tell me I can't eat my bacon. Thus he declared all foods clean. He's not even talking about food. What he's talking about, it's actually a joke. It's actually a joke. I don't know if anybody would laugh, but he says, what goes into the mouth does not defile. He's talking about ritual purity. If you say, well, I touched a cup and someone who had been to a funeral had touched that cup, and now I drank out of that cup, and so that wine or that beverage was defiled, and now I'm defiled. He goes, no, that'll come out in the toilet. That's what he said. He says, what you're worried about will come out in the toilet. Now, what it says literally is, it goes into the belly. He gives you a little anatomy lesson. It goes into the stomach and then passes out, cleansing all food. That's what it says, cleansing all food. Not thus he declared. And the body He's making a joke, like, you're so worried what you touched and you didn't wash your hands. Remember, it's washing your hands before eating. You say, well, I ate. Oh, you didn't wash your hands. Don't worry about it. When I go to the toilet next. So now a Pharisee would say, it's not that kind of defilement. It doesn't come out in the toilet. It's a ritual. He's playing with them there. He's saying the thing you're worried about, the body takes care of. But here's what you should worry about. What are the things that come from here? And then he names these 13 things. Yeah. And those are Mark's ethics. And you know what? They're the exact list that Paul gives throughout his letters. Adultery,
that's pretty good evidence. Yeah, they're influencing.
Yeah, I'll just read it to you. We'll give a little ethics.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, listen, does this sound like Paul or not? Here's, if you do these things, you won't inherit the kingdom. I'm quoting Paul. Evil thoughts, fornication, theft, murder, adultery, coveting, wickedness, deceit, licentiousness, envy, slander, pride, foolishness. Sounds like Romans 1, 1 Corinthians 6, other ethical lists that Paul has in his letters. So Mark is reflecting Paul, and what happens is it basically gets destroyed. And here's what happens. Matthew writes first, he incorporates 90% of Mark. So why do I need Mark now? I've got 90% of it. I mean, and he adds an ending. We're going to get to the ending in a minute because there's no resurrection appearances. You never see Jesus once he's dead on the cross. Last time you ever see him again.
That's when the curtain goes down.
That's when the curtain goes down. So basically, the idea would be that I lost my train of thought. What was I saying before I said the
Matthew has taken?
Yeah, Matthew incorporates it. So people then begin to think, and once it's in the New Testament, and I know you've had this experience growing up. Most kids do. I want to read the Bible. You read the New Testament, and you read Matthew, and it's 28 chapters. And then you get to Mark, and it's 16 chapters, ends at verse 8. And you think, okay, I'll read it. But as you're reading, you think, I've already read all this. Our minds don't catch on to these details we've been talking about. Why do you call me good? And why do you ask me about the good? And so forth. You don't pick it up. And then you get the idea, oh, I know what this is. This is like a short kind of précis of the whole thing. So, if you want like a quick take on Jesus, read Mark. But if you want the whole thing, read Matthew. And then Luke comes along and he says this, other people have written these things, but now I am giving you even more. And he does a lot more.
He does,
even more. It's not as many chapters, but the length of it. And he also incorporates about 80% of Mark. He takes out some things that he takes out a lot of chapters. Almost, I think all of chapter 7 he just takes out.
Really?
Yeah, he's not.
I know they differ on the baptism of Jesus compared.
Yeah, I think it's 645. Let's see, 645 through about 645 through 8:14, or right in there. He just takes it out.
That's where Jesus is walking on the water, and they thought it was a ghost.
Yeah, I think he takes all that out. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm. Huh. So, yeah, I believe so. We can check, but it's in the course. I have my Bible here, and I had marked that in the course, but I don't remember exactly the verse. So, what happens then is you say, well, Mark's not destroyed. It's there. Well, it's there if you'll just read Mark. But what happens now is you say, well, tell me about the birth of Jesus. And you start giving a combination Christmas story of Luke and Matthew. Okay.
Yeah.
And then you say, well, what happened at the end when the women came to the tomb? Combination of Matthew, Luke, and John.
Yeah.
Well, Mark doesn't have any appearances.
No.
In fact, in Mark, a young man, not an angel. There's no angel moving a stone. There's no earthquake. Mark is, now, you can see how Matthew would think this is really deficient. It's not going to impress people. The women come to the tomb and they're told he's not here. You'll see him in the galley, and then just run away and it ends. That's not very, that's not very edifying. We need
That's not glorious.
And we need proof that he was raised from the dead, you see.
And that's why the Gospel of John is called the Gospel of Signs. He shows those proofs. Yeah.
And also in Paul, again, Paul's the same way. You ask Paul, what kind of a body is the resurrection body of Jesus? Because he said, I've seen the Lord.
Yeah.
Now, let's go backwards. He says, well, whatever kind of body it is, this is Philippians 3, I think 21 or so. Whatever kind of body Jesus had, you will have when you're raised from the dead. And then he describes it. It's glorious, it's immortal, it's powerful, it's a life-giving spirit, it's not of dust, not flesh and blood. Makes that clear. That's the resurrection body that he saw.
Spiritual body.
Right, a spiritual body. And I'm not going to go by Acts here, but in Acts, it's a blinding light. Well, maybe that is a tradition that's valid. I mean, it kind of fits. Is that you would see something that is so beyond what he calls, when he goes up to heaven, the third heaven, and then paradise, he says, I saw and heard things unutterable.
Mm-hmm.
And that can mean either unlawful, because he goes on to say, which are unlawful for a man to speak.
Yeah.
But unlawful can mean a secret, like it's forbidden. But things unutterable can also be this kind of eye is not seen, nor ear heard. Paul quotes this, nor has entered the heart of man what God has prepared for those that love him. Well, have you ever thought of that? If eye has not seen it or ear heard it, then Paul's just told you it is not a physical body, because he's saying that
there's an eye opener.
Yeah. The reason people the reason evangelicals go crazy over that is they say, so you're saying it was just a spirit. Why are they saying just a spirit?
Yeah, I was going to say, why the word just?
If you can transform a flesh and blood human being, because not just Jesus, he says he's the firstborn of many. Let's see anybody take a flesh and blood human being and go like, and they become a life-giving spirit, eternal
light.
Let's see you do that. So to say just as if that's not, it's actually according to Paul, it's the greatest miracle of the universe, because God is actually begetting spiritual children into this glorified state. That's what Paul saw. Now, the problem that people have with that, they say, well, then how do we prove Jesus was raised? Because it's like just a vision, or what if he was kind of deluded, or what if he just imagined it? Well, you got to decide that, I guess. What if he was? But the point is, he tells you, I have seen the Lord. And then you go, but what kind of a body? He goes, you fool. He says, you fool. It's a stupid, why are you asking me to tell you what the spirit world looks like? That's like telling a blind person what colors are. You say, well, what is red and green and blue? Say, well, it's
it's not black, it's not white. They can tell you what it's not, but that doesn't help.
Yeah, but if you're blind, you hardly even know, you don't know white even. So you wouldn't even know black, because you have to have the contrast to know that it's black. So
that's like being deaf and trying to understand music.
Yeah, exactly. Same thing. It's just an analogy. So Paul says, God, everything has a body in the universe. If it's an entity, body means entity, means a mode of being. Okay. So wind does not have a body. Wind is not an entity. It's a force. An entity is a defined thing. in terms of the living creation, it would be a plant or an animal or a human or whatever. It's a defined thing. It has a body. A rose plant has a body of a rose. Okay. So what does a glorified Son of God look like? He goes, I can't tell you, but I can tell you one thing. God gives everything a body suited to its status, you might say, or to its purpose, or its. So I don't think I think he saw something, probably heard a voice, because later he does hear voices.
Right.
And maybe the book of Acts, I'm not saying all of Acts is wrong on Paul. Maybe that tradition would pass down, that it was like a blinding light and a voice saying, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? I'm just saying, maybe, because that could have got passed on.
Well,
And
it certainly changed his course.
Who are you? He's not going, oh, I see you. Yeah, let me see your wounds. And all. No, it's not like that. It's not like the. Now, it is a glorified body. So people get nervous about this because they want to prove the resurrection as if a resuscitated corpse would be enough. Words, I want to know that he was put in a tomb, this crucified, bloody body, and it came walking out later showing its wounds. Well, guess what? He would still eat, and he does.
And he does.
So what happens after you eat?
40 days and 40 nights. Yeah, he's got to defecate and urinate and all that.
Exactly. So all of a sudden, we don't have a transformed, glorified being. We just have a resuscitated corpse. It happens all the time.
I know what's interesting, Dr. Tabor, if I can just
sure
go ahead and interrupt you, but the way Joseph Smith got out of that is he said, and this is kind of a creative theology. He said, in heaven, Paul said, flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, but flesh and blood are not in the kingdom of God because blood is not going to be running through your veins. Spirit is going to be running through your veins. That was how he kind of said.
But is it flesh though? Because flesh is like flesh.
Yeah. Well,
so Mormons.
The resurrection is literal in Mormonism.
Do they believe that, like, let's just cut to the chase, you would eat, defecate in heaven?
I know. I get it with you. I know. And how do you travel, you know?
And would you have sex and reproduce?
Oh, absolutely. In Mormonism, without question.
In the kingdom, in the heavenly kingdom, or on your planet or wherever you are. Yeah.
Yep. That's part of the.
How is it different from this world? Then it's just more glorified, because the Jehovah's Witnesses also picture. Remember that the people during the millennium are just, they're human beings, like you read in Isaiah. When it describes the new heavens and new earth, it talks about people will plant and eat and have vineyards, and but they say that then there will be a group of 144,000 that are the glorified ones, and the others are getting a chance to have that. Russell believed everybody would finally have a chance, and then the dead are raised and they get a chance, and there's this 100-year period. Herbert Armstrong picked up on some of that with his stuff. I
think the way Joseph Smith envisioned it is the glorification element is having your mortal blood replaced by immortal spirit, which immortalizes the body. I think that's his approach. But he did present.
Biologically, that would not make sense, would it?
Oh, sure it does. Joseph Smith said it. Just follow.
Because we know blood carries nutrients and oxygen, and cells exchange.
But spirit carries glory and eternal life. That's the life-giving spirit, is how Joseph Smith would propose it. But it's interesting how he tried to get through that and yet keep the body. I was just showing
what the evangelicals say. They just make an easy move. They say, well, for 40 days he stayed flesh and blood. Right. And then at the end of that, when he ascended to heaven, that's when he was transformed. And
Oh,
so, yeah, Paul saw the transformed body. He didn't see the physical body. But the physical body, did come out of the tomb and walk around. But the
that's
thing
what
is, for Paul, he uses the term resurrection,
he
not
does.
glorification. He says Christ is raised from the dead, immortal. So I think if you go with Paul and Mark, these resuscitated corpse thing comes later, and I think it comes for apologetic reasons, defending the faith. Because Celsus, for example, one of the great critics of Christianity in the 2nd century, he says, remember, he's arguing with, or Origen writes against Celsus, and he says, well, okay, you've got a bunch of hysterical women running around saying they saw this and saw that. And he suggests, he says, how do you know they're just not deluded and full of fables? And we have this in all cultures and religions, and these wild stories go around. Grandma appeared in the rocking chair and told me this and that, and she'd been dead 20 years. And he doesn't say that, but I'm saying he just says you don't have any proof, and they go, oh well, wait, we have proof. It's not just a visionary thing. People touched him. He ate, and that eating is really important for Luke.
So is the doubting Thomas touching.
Doubting Thomas, and then would you like some of this fish?
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
Now, it's interesting, though, in Catholic, I have a book on Mary that I finished now, and it'll be coming.
Oh, it is done. Good. Is it published?
One of the things they say about Jesus and Mary, and later medieval, this would be late church fathers and into the Middle Ages, is they can't defecate or urinate because they're so holy, even though they're flesh and blood. And you go like, oh, what do you mean? And what they say is, well, they ate just the right amount of food, just the right amount of liquid, that their body would absorb it all, so there was never anything that needed to be excreted.
Oh, wow.
Because they couldn't imagine the Holy Virgin Mary going to the bathroom. It's like, oh, don't say that. It's like thinking of your parents having sex, when you're growing up. You go, oh, I don't want to hear that.
Not that image.
So, and Jesus, are you kidding? What is he going to go aside from the disciples and say, well, I got to. Now, this is not, Catholics today, I'm sure, are much more along the lines of, no, he was a real human being. And I think even the idea that he was a Jew is getting out there more. I mean, you think of the great Catholic theologians and New Testament scholars like Raymond Brown and so forth. They're totally working in the same world I work in.
Right.
But I'm talking about the mythology of the Middle Ages. It just became crazy, Well, you probably know the Proto-Evangelium of James. What a crazy name.
Yeah, but, I know, right? But yeah, that's one of the later apocryphal.
Yeah, guess what? Mary has the baby Jesus, but she's still an intact virgin. And then when it describes it, it just says, and the baby just like appears. And he walks over and starts nursing. Or maybe he crawled, but the idea you get is because she can't let the baby pass through in a normal birth, because so I guess it'd be like a divine cesarean with no cut or scar, just like pull the baby out. Well, then Salome, her sister, is commissioned in this crazy story, in my opinion, to check. We got a baby. We got a woman that had a baby. Yeah. Mary, prepare yourself. I'm going to give you a pelvic exam. Seriously, it doesn't say it. It says, Mary, prepare yourself.
Check her condition.
Okay, that means get up on the bed or whatever. Get yourself. And she inserts her finger, and all of a sudden fire hits it and it burns up. She loses her hand. And then her hand is healed out of grace,
Sure.
but the idea is that you doubted, she's still a virgin. She's never had sex. She has had a baby, but she's totally virginal, even as a woman with a baby.
No, when is the proto-evangelium?
Oh, it's hard to date. Some people try to put it early. I'd put it as late as possible. It's such nonsense.
Yeah.
It's just
At least second century, wouldn't it be?
Oh yeah, it's in it way in the second century. Usually, all these dates we just guess at.
That issue became only prevalent. In fact, it'd probably be further than the second century, because those issues weren't anywhere near the gospel.
That's why when people say, "Well, the proto-evangelium is," I'm not up on it, frankly.
I'm not either.
I've got the books here that would give the first. When did the patristic fathers first mention it? That book. But that doesn't mean the version we have is second century. It rings to me like something much later because it's so crazy.
Sure.
I hate to use that word, but nobody.
I don't it's like those infant Jesus stories.
Oh yeah, Jesus strikes. My favorite is he strikes a kid dead.
Yeah, he strikes a kid dead.
Making the clay birds is nothing, but some kid did something. He goes, "Yeah, die."
Get out of my way.
So
interesting.
So that kind of stuff develops, but
one other thing I wanted to just briefly touch on, and this kind of jumps us back to the beginning of Mark. One of the much more interesting ideas, and I'm intending on looking into this a little more, is it was in Mark where the first couple of identifications of who Jesus was not given by humans. It was given by the demons.
Yes.
Jesus immediately silenced them.
Yeah, that's another motif.
I thought that was remarkable when you bought that. How many times have I read the Gospel of Mark and I did not realize it?
There's a secret throughout Mark until a certain chapter. I'm not going to tell you what it is because that's part of the course. You got to kind of figure that out yourself as you take the course. But there's a secret in Mark. And the idea is don't tell who I am, don't tell what I've done. So even when he raises the dead, puts all the crowd out, Peter, James, and John in an inner room and raises the little 12-year-old girl in Mark. And then he says, strictly charge them, don't tell anybody. Well, this is like, who would ever do that? I mean, Matthew and Luke are reading and they go, what?
Yeah,
of course we're going to tell people. Jesus heals the sick. He raises the dead. He walks on. We're going to tell everybody.
Man, in our day and age, it'd be all over the internet.
See, Mark believes that Jesus did all these things. I think the author probably believes it. I guess he did. We can't judge. We don't even know who he was, but he probably believed it. But what he's trying to get across is that's not what makes Jesus the Christ. Not the power and glory to do miracles. What makes him the Christ is dead on the cross. So finally we get the final scene of Jesus alive. Okay. And a centurion Roman at the cross says, truly this was the Son of God, and he's already dead. So what you're doing is you're saying he gave everything down to his very last breath, and that's the Son of God. Now, people say, well, did he really mean it, or is he being sarcastic? And they come up with all these theories. What Perrin taught me, my teacher, and I pass it on in the course because I think it's very convincing. I don't want to give it away, but I guess I did jump into it a little bit, is
it's all good.
Is you've got to realize if you're going to follow Jesus and say, oh, he's the Christ, I believe in him, that will be you. Truly, this is the Son of God is because he did fulfill what you have, what is
What you have
expected.
to do. Yeah.
You've got to give your life as a ransom for
Oh, you
many.
want to talk about your belief? No, show it. That's
Show it,
what
yeah, and with suffering. And this is Paul too. When he
this is Paul too.
the biggest chapter in
Paul
Paul,
constantly talked about suffering, getting
yeah,
stoned and bit by the snake and beaten and all that,
and
shipwreck.
the main passage for Paul for glory is Romans 8, that the sufferings of this world are not worthy to be compared with the glory to be revealed. But then as he describes it, then he says, provided that we suffer with him, that we may be glorified with him. That's Mark right there. That's Mark.
That's
So
Mark.
Mark is Paul. I mean, I don't mean Paul wrote it. No, Mark
Oh, right.
has absorbed that message, and he is so concerned that the church, as we call it, or the movement, is drifting into this power and glory and what Christians do today. I mean, when evangelicals stopped me on campus, the Campus Crusade people and all them, for spiritual laws, uh, it's like, if you were to die tonight, do you know you would go to heaven? Absolutely, do you know? And you go like, yeah, most people, yeah, I hope so. Well,
Yeah.
did you know the Bible says all have sinned? Have you ever sinned and fallen short of the glory of God? None is righteous, no, not one. So it doesn't matter if you are trying to be a good person. We've all sinned. And guess what? Only through the blood of Christ can we be saved. Would you like to accept Christ now? Here's the sinner's prayer. Let's read it together and bow our heads. And you then will have the glory of heaven. It's guaranteed. Christ promises it, and so forth. I'm not going to caricature them and say that they say you can go live a wicked life. They don't say that. They believe you should change. But
Sure.
notice the appeal is not like, would you like to begin really following the ways of God? Because I need to warn you that if you do, like Jesus, you will end up with a lot of suffering and probably death, because this world does not tolerate speaking truth to power for very long. And we know that all over the world, where people are jailed in many, many countries. Fortunately, in the United States, we have a few more legal rights, but there's plenty of injustice, plenty of racism, people arrested, evidence planted. I mean, you bet if you get out of line in a big, big cultural way, you'll be taken care of. Believe me, you will be taken care of. And people know that.
Reminds me of the Pistis Sophia when the risen Jesus or the books of Yehu. Justin Sledge, the esoteric YouTuber, calls it you. I've heard it called Yehu. It might be you. But anyway, Jesus tells the apostles, and it's right up front in the front of the book. I've got the Coptic, the German, and the English. Thank goodness I've got the English translation. He says, you have to learn how to crucify the world, or the world will crucify you. I'm not going to teach you how to crucify the world, but the way he does that is through the ascent, the mystical steps, much like what you talk about in the Ascent to Paradise. A lot of the pseudo talks about that too. But even Paul, after he ascended and received that utterly unutterable, spectacular view, I'll call it. I'm not trying to be disrespectful, and then when he comes back, he says, yeah, but now I have a thorn in the flesh.
Suffering.
And he asked the Lord to remove it several times, didn't he?
3 times, yeah.
3 times.
He says, my strength is made perfect in weakness. There it is, right there. From Jesus. From the heavenly Jesus said that. So he's still talking Mark from heaven.
So, I mean, be careful if you say, well, I want to be so righteous. I want to see heaven. And well, go easy. Hold on. We don't know what that thorn of the flesh is, but boy, howdy, I don't know if I'd want a thorn in the flesh. I've had splinters, and those are bad enough, slivers and stuff. But I know that's not what Paul's talking about. But
no, we're not sure what it is, but people speculate. But whatever it was, it does sound like it says flesh. He also calls it a angel of Satan or a messenger, but it is the word angelos. So it is something very formidable. It's not just, oh, my back kind of hurts or something.
No. Well, yeah.
He does say it was given to me. So people have suggested, well, maybe, he was stoned and beaten and maybe he's all disfigured and he's partly blind. But no, it sounds like something happened. I think I list in the footnote 42 different ideas on what it is.
Yeah.
But what people forget is he doesn't say, over the years I have had this happen. He said, I had this one experience, and to keep me from being exalted, because it was the highest experience that you could ever have of any human being. I think he means that he basically was exalted to heaven. Well, he says that, but he experienced the glory. It was, as I say in the book, it was a foretaste of the glory that you're going to get at the resurrection. Yeah. And then he says, to keep me from being too exalted, by seeing that, I was given this messenger of Satan. Yeah. I don't know what it is, but it's something.
Well, back then,
it started bothering him right then. So some people have said that, one of the worst things you can have, pain is bad, but people talk about migraine headaches or something like that, where you just close the doors. If you even hear the sound or see light, so it was something on that level where he just, it's really bad suffering, but it doesn't sound like a disease or an injury. It sounds like a thing he's feeling, pain, pain. Yeah. And it's called weakness. My strength is made perfect in weakness.
In weakness, yeah. See, that's that idea. The widow gave everything. Her strength was she's the weakest of the weak in that society. And it's so interesting how there's
so I'm going to wind this up. Let's see, we got an hour and 40. Yeah, we're doing okay. I want to go. I've got to do some other things tonight.
Oh, sure.
It's later here, but I'm glad to speak with you. And next time we plan this, probably needs to be in June, because I've got a crazy schedule coming up.
Okay.
No worries. I would like us to talk about Paul's Ascent and that book, because I know you're really into that. And let's raise the question as we close that a lot of scholars are discussing right now, Litwa and Dennis McDonald and lots of Miller, some of the people Derek's interviewing. To what degree is Paul influenced by Hellenistic and Greco-Roman ideas and culture?
Oh, I love it.
I want to talk about that in his letters. It's one thing to go through the Gospels and find motifs from Iliad and the Odyssey and motifs from different Hellenistic literature. Quite a few of the contemporary scholars are doing this, and it's something we all need to look at and consider. But it's another thing to talk about the mystical cosmos that Paul inhabits in his mind and imagination. Right. And to what degree would it be very similar to Poimandres, the Mithras liturgy? Yeah. The Dream of Scipio.
The Dream of Scipio.
The Dream of Scipio.
And that's based on the myth of air.
The myth of air and so forth. So we'll talk about that. So it'll be really good, because it won't be what we did tonight was more the theology of Paul, and pretty common, people have heard about what's resurrection and what's this and what's that. No, this will be things that most people, it's not their world. It's not their world. Right. And that is, when you go up through the seven heavens, there's seven heavens. When you go up to the seven heavens, you don't just do it. It's dangerous, very dangerous. Yeah. And it's inhabited by this whole cloud of forces, just like the underworld.
Mm-hmm.
And Paul believes in this. He says things in heaven, things on earth, and things under the earth. He talks about principalities and powers and heights and
Mm-hmm.
depths.
Yep.
He's talking about the whole cosmos is under this sort of slavery. And he calls them the elemental spirits of the cosmos, stoicheia.
Yeah.
So,
so he does the elemental spirits. That's so fascinating.
Yeah, these are
He
it's not
live.
this Satan rebelling kind of thing that the evangelicals get into. It's actually the idea, it's actually just being in the muck, being down here in the lower levels, and it's thick. And as you go up, it gets more airy and more light, and you're trying to escape and get up. And he gets to do that. So
and he did not live in a vacuum. I mean, this is culture. Why? Yeah. Oh, I'm looking.
And I really want to talk about to what sense does he give up his Hebraic worldview, because I think he does. And by that I mean the world is made. This world is good. I'm not saying as a Gnostic, but you read Genesis 1. The creation's good, 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 very good. There's no evil powers above or chthonic powers below trying to grab you.
Wow.
There are no demons in the early texts. Abraham doesn't have to worry about, the demon almost got me, But Mark is living in that world. Paul is living in that world. And
that'll be fascinating.
Paul is our only first person witness. Think about that.
I have
all the texts
that is so profound that you brought that up.
They are not first person. We have the rabbis ascending, the 4 rabbis in the Talmuds.
Yeah, they're talking about others. Yeah.
Or they're saying they were those, like Enoch. So Paul is very important because he actually shows. I mean, I didn't doubt that people tried this, but we got a guy who wrote. When I realized this and had my dissertation idea, I went to talk to Jonathan Z. Smith, my teacher, on Paul and Hellenistic religions and all. He had never thought of it like that either. He said, "Oh my God, you are onto something. This is the only first person."
Yeah, that just gives me goose flesh, man. That's
so say, well, Revelation of John. Revelation of John is a literary. That's not a known character like Paul that we can track autobiographically. No, he's the only one. Well, we better really study that. So that's book, big. Paul's Ascent to Paradise. I'm telling you, it's gonna rock your world.
Yes, sir. I am looking so forward to that discussion. Thank you so very much.
Great to be with you.
The wonderful information you've shared with us tonight. We will be back just as soon as we can.
Okay.
And we will share.
And I hope to see some of your viewers in my Mark course. And if you make it by the 28th, you can come in the Zoom meeting. So
you'll love those too. So thank you again, Dr. Tabor.
Hope to see you there too, Kerry. If you can.
I will. Absolutely.
Okay. Bye-bye. Take care.
See ya.